You can't legislate morality. I get this comment frequently. Don't legislate my morality. Don't tell me what to do. Or something like, why is your way better than somebody else's way? How can you say that the Bible is better than other religions? This is a big topic, and I'm going to skip most of the objections today because most, if not all of them, are not even real arguments. Most are really just a fancy way of saying, I want to control myself, and you are not the boss of me. But that's kind of silly too. For all of humanity, we've known that someone has to make the rules for society. Some rulers have been good. Most rulers have been bad. God, by definition, is always good, so my money is on him. Yet, to many, his rules seem strict. People see the Ten Commandments as a list of don'ts, and they don't like that. So most people make up their own morality. All laws legislate morality. Prove me wrong. When you stop at a stop sign, what is the worst that can happen? You run the stop sign and kill someone. That's morality, like it or not. And every law is moral and has a moral component to it. Every single law tells you what you ought to do or not do. That is literally morality, right and wrong, and what is the difference? And then sometimes penalty for missing that mark. But we're more and more confused by this simple concept, and for the life of me, I cannot figure out why. We talk about rights. People talk about what is owed them or what is owed us, but we don't think about the responsibility that comes with these rights. Then there are those that go off into the weeds and pretend to be talking about rights when they're really talking about things that are against the Ten Commandments or murder or other various immoral practices. Today, we're going to look at 5 laws where the conservatives are pushing back in legislation and trying to regain morality through this legislation. And we're going to look at one law that tried to remove certain humans from the planet. I'm Matt Odegaard. Welcome to Church Public. Welcome back to Church Public. I really appreciate you tuning in today. My name is Matt Odegaard, and I will be your host today. If you haven't already, check out churchpublic.com for more episodes. On the front page, you can get all the audio episodes. Then if you click through to the podcast page, you can see the video episodes. This one today will not be super heavy on video, but I always appreciate you listening in any form that you can. If you are on any of the podcast platforms, please like, subscribe, share. All of those things help me get the word out because essentially what I'm trying to do is help you understand this world and understand this world from a Christian perspective because this culture is nutty and it just seems to be getting more and more crazy by the day. And I hate to say it, but in not wanting to foretell the future or anything, we're moving in a direction where morality is going downhill. We're not moving into a place where morality is being raised and elevated as the pinnacle of society in a certain sense. Now, the other side, and I say that in a strange way, the other side will tell you that their way is morally right and that they are literally fighting for morality as well. Unfortunately, their morality is based on some human's perspective on what should be right or should be wrong or etc. And unfortunately, when a human decides to choose what is right and wrong, oftentimes humans choose wrong. And that's why I say many rulers in history were good. Actually, it's more like some, and actually it's really more like a few. Most of the rulers throughout literally all of human history, and this is where I'm a student of history, you should be a student of history, you should figure things out, what has happened in the past, how have humans led societies in the past, and look at them and go, I think that was a good thing to do. I don't think that was a good thing to do. For instance, murdering millions and millions of people. Usually a bad thing. That's a sign of a bad leader. In addition to a bunch of other weird and immoral things that you can look to in history because nothing, as Solomon says, is new under the sun. We've all been on this roller coaster before, and we do it again and again and again. I don't mean that in terms of reincarnation. I just mean that in terms of human nature. Human nature is what it is. It does not change. God is who he is, and he also does not change. The only way those two trains moving apart from each other into infinity can ever come together is through Jesus. That's really it. That's the basis of the gospel. I didn't mean to preach today, but sometimes I get talking and that's what comes out because that's where my heart is. And that's my heart for you. I want you to understand that if you as a human are moving in a direction, you are never going to encounter God on your own in that direction. The only way to do it is through the grace of God and his son, Jesus Christ. That's it. So anyway, we're talking about laws and we're talking about legislation. And you can look through history at different rulers and different ways that they've tried to help people find morality. One of the things that I love about American history and about the founders is they looked back in history at the Greeks, the Romans, and especially the Jews. They looked at the scriptures, they looked at the Christians and said, how did they implement their morality and raise their whole society? Which is why, almost to the person, founder after founder after founder, you get them saying something like, this is me paraphrasing, but you can go and look up these actual quotes, something like, if your society is not moral, if they're not biblical, if they're not grounded in morality, then your society will not go on. It will fail. To the T, almost every one of them said something like this because they knew that their morality personally, in a family sense, in a community sense, would mark either success or failure for the society. Now we're in a place where the society, by and large, just does not have a shared morality, number one, or if they do, their shared morality is just fundamentally wacky. And I mean wacky in the weirdest sense of the term. The morality is exactly backwards. And it's this idea that, again, nothing new under the sun. Jesus said, you'll call the good evil and you'll call the evil good. I mean, this is just what we are seeing. And so this is where we get to today, and we get to some different laws. And I want to look at 5 laws really briefly, and don't let your eyes roll yet. I'm not going to get into all the details of the law. You can go and read them if you want to and if you'd like to. I've read a lot of them, but most people won't, and most people don't, and that's okay. And that's what I want to help you understand is just the essence of some of these laws. And I want to look at one law, and actually we'll start with this. And this is the first law that we see today, where the Democrats proposed this bill that was called the Women's Health Protection Act. And fortunately, it did not go through. But this act was an effort to codify, to put into law, Roe versus Wade. I'm not going to get into the ins and outs of Roe versus Wade today. If you've listened before, you understand what it is, what it means, where it comes from. The 10-second review is that Roe versus Wade is based on an imaginary idea that a right to privacy exists in the Constitution, and therefore, because a right to privacy exists in the Constitution, a right to kill babies and abortion also exists in the Constitution. Many conservative and liberal scholars, including Ruth Bader Ginsburg, has said the precedent set by this court case is based on nothing, essentially. Again, my paraphrase, you can go and look up Ruth Bader Ginsburg's comments on this. That's probably the best place to start because she has been, until her recent death, a huge hero in the feminist and liberal and progressive camp. So, and then there's tons and tons of conservative people who have weighed in on Roe versus Wade. It is, again, based on nothing. However, this new act was trying to codify that into law, and they were trying to say that because Roe versus Wade has been around for 50 years, that now it is or should be law. Again, that is not exactly how laws work. That's something called stare decisis, or something based on precedent that once a law has been around for a long time, it's basically common law, and that holds to some degree. But if a law is wrong from the beginning, should that be? And even the founders and the writers of the Constitution would say no, which is why there is an amendment process, which is why there is legislation and all of these different things. So fortunately, that act was not passed. I think I have here that it was 46 votes to 48 votes. They needed 60 in order to move it to the next stage in lawmaking, and all but one of the Democrats voted in favor of this. That's significant. The reason that's significant is this is something the Democrats as a party are for. They want this. Now, it says Women's Health Protection Act. That sounds wonderful. Who doesn't want to protect women? The Democrats are brilliant as far as it comes to euphemisms. That's not what this bill is. That's not what this bill does. What this bill does is it would have functionally allowed abortion up until the point of birth and maybe even beyond in some cases. I'm serious. That's really what it was about. Again, you can go and read some of this bill if you want. And fortunately, it did not pass. But that is one side of this argument, and you have to understand the goal on that side of the argument is to allow abortion up until the point of birth, and in some people, extreme in this case perhaps, even beyond. So there is no limitation, abortion without limitation. That is their goal. It is stated. They literally voted on it almost to the one, except for one holdout, who by chance is in a very red district, kind of purpley red district as well. So he knows that if he votes for this, he's going to be out. And, whether that's self-preservation or actually his ideology, I can't say. But that's Manchin, by the way. But these are the things that the Democrats, the left, are not afraid to push. And that's the point here. They will legislate and they will push legislation to invoke their morality into existence. That is their goal, and that's the way they're going to go about doing it. They want to change the culture and then influence the culture, both by all of this mass media, and that's another side that we talk about frequently and we'll get back to at a later date, and through legislation. And poor conservatives have really done a poor job of this, as there's no better way I can say it. They have not done a good job at legislation. They have not done a good job at creatively showing culture what is right and what is true. We just haven't done a good job at that. I can just admit that is true. So it encourages me when conservatives come out and propose legislation that helps protect morality. And when I say helps protect morality, I mean things like biblical morality and biblical freedom, biblical ethics, biblical sexuality. Those are important points. And even to the point of life, biblical life, like actually keeping people alive. And that's the important thing, because this Women's Health Protection Act would have literally killed millions over the course of its, I was going to say life, but that doesn't even make sense at this point. At any rate, these are the important things to know. And again, you can go and read this Women's Health Protection Act for yourself. It did not pass, but that doesn't mean they're going to stop. They will keep bringing these things up and up and up until they process through this. Even the Equality Act, which President Biden talked about in the State of the Union that he really, really wants to sign. I've talked about that numerous times. I'm not going to talk about it today, but it is the single biggest affront to religious freedom in America, period, in American history. It is and would be, if it passed, the worst affront to religious freedom in America and in American history. And that is not an overstatement. That literally is what is written in the bill. I've talked about it before. I'm not going to go into all of that today because I want to talk about a couple of other ones. I want to talk about this Don't Say Gay bill. It's important that we talk about this because that's what detractors are calling it, and that's what people are saying this bill is in Florida. And it's not. So first of all, it doesn't say those words in it that you can't say gay. But the left, progressives, Democrats, even the President of the United States have weighed in and said this is a terrible, terrible bill in Florida, and it's literally going to kill people. The White House said, quote, "Every parent hopes our leaders will ensure their children's safety, protection, and freedom." They said, quote, conservative politicians in Florida rejected those values by advancing legislation that is designed to target and attack kids who need support the most, LGBTQI+, students who are already vulnerable to bullying and violence just for being themselves, end quote. And President Biden personally weighed in and said on Twitter, quote, "I want every member of the LGBTQI+ community, don't forget the plus, especially the kids who will be impacted by this hateful bill, to know that you are loved and accepted just the way you are," end quote. So these are the two bills. What the bills really say is something like, quote, "may not encourage classroom discussion about sexual orientation or gender identity in primary grade levels or in a manner that is not age appropriate or developmentally appropriate for students." Now, if you heard that last statement, that's what the bill actually says and actually talks about, that in primary classrooms, primary grade classrooms, the children should not be encouraged by their teachers to talk about sexual ethics and gender identities by the teachers, because this is happening in schools. So this bill is an effort to stop the teachers from talking about this. It's not kids talking. It's not saying don't talk about it at all. It's saying the teachers are intentionally doing this, and they are. And this is something that I am glad to see in terms of legislation, because if there is discussion beyond anything really beyond biology of what actual reproduction is, it's not appropriate in the classroom. It's just not. Period. I don't have any further statements on that. And we all should feel like that. If you want your students' teachers teaching them how to think and what to think about sexuality and gender, I think your perspective as a parent has been is missing the mark a little bit. And that may come off as strong, but you, the parent, are supposed to be the one teaching your child about the morality of sexuality. My encouragement would be to consult biblical sexuality. Of course, not everyone is going to agree with that. Yeah, I'll just read this part. This is Chasten Buttigieg, the activist and husband of U.S. Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg, denounced Florida Governor Ron DeSantis in a Twitter post that said, quote, "This will kill kids, Ron DeSantis. You are purposely making your state a harder place for LGBTQ kids," forgot the plus on that one, "to survive." I'm going to end the quote there. This will literally kill kids. So to not talk about gender and sexuality from the teachers to the students is going to kill children. I don't see it. I don't understand where this perspective comes from. It's like the teachers are indoctrinating students in this radical gender ideology, and to not say it is going to kill kids. This is back again to calling evil good, calling good evil. I can't see it another way. Like this is just literal insanity. So again, I'm just going to say any discussion of sexual preference or anything like that goes into a moral discussion. And you've left science and are now talking about identity, either from a cultural or philosophical viewpoint. It's not, obviously not biblical, but you're not talking about biology anymore. I'm going to skip this quote on DeSantis right now. There's just a lot in this, but you can go and read the actual bill. I believe it's number 1557. You can read about the different rights of different students in that. So we're also going to talk about the Texas 6-week abortion ban. We're going to follow up on that. We've talked about that before, and the Texas 6-week abortion ban has saved around 60% more babies just in the time that it has been around. That is huge, saving 60%. Now, I wish that number was 100%. I do. I don't see any reason ever to allow the killing of babies. Morally speaking, you can't change my mind on that. There is no circumstance where I can imagine that the baby who is innocent of all charges deserves to die for the punishment of someone else's crime. I can't see a perspective where that is possible. So it's a good news that this Texas 6-week abortion ban has saved at least 60% more than were previously recorded just in terms of numbers and statistics. Now, it's just numbers and statistics, but that's a big number. And we want to keep doing legislation like this that saves more babies. So, for instance, we also have a Florida 15-week abortion ban that is coming into fruition. So this Florida bill is similar to the Mississippi bill, which we've talked about before, and this is important to understand that basically at 15 weeks, the Mississippi bill says you cannot do an abortion for most circumstances. Florida has introduced a bill that will be very similar, again, receiving lots of pushback from the left and those that just want to remove babies for any reason, as we've seen from this first Women's Health Act. So I just want to say it's great that states are starting to step in and say, we can legislate morality because all laws are moral. Let's start putting laws on the books that show morality and protect morality. This is important. It's important to shield, especially children, the whole society, but especially children, from the evils of the world and the evils of the society. Like it is like an ostrich putting its head in the sand to pretend that these things are not going on and to pretend that the culture is not trying to get your children. I've seen video after video of teachers saying your children are not yours to teach, they are ours to teach. And that's infuriating to me because they're wrong. First of all, children are given to the parents as a gift, as a blessing, as an offspring to teach and grow, again, train in the way of the Lord. We've talked about that a lot of different times in different ways. And then we, in loco parentis, in place of the parent, give them temporarily with certain conditions to educators to teach them in the way that we want to teach them. And we have laws and legislation for that in terms of electing school board members, and they get teachers on board, and that's all supposed to flow from the parents. Now, what you're seeing over and over again is the teachers saying, no, parents, we went to school, we have all the degrees, we know how to teach your kids, you don't. And I'm not saying all teachers are like this, but I've seen so much evidence that some teachers are like this, and that's not this system. That's not how it works. It's not how it's supposed to work. That is how it's going, but that's what we need to understand, and that's what we need to figure out. So you have the Texas 6-week abortion ban. It is saving lives. You have the Mississippi law that is going to the Supreme Court. It's already there. They've already heard arguments. We're waiting on their resolution, which probably already has happened, but they haven't revealed yet. The Florida has also just instituted a 15-week abortion ban, similar to this Mississippi law. So that's a really good thing. And we'll see what comes out there. Another aside to say that there are a lot of trigger laws in different states around that if Roe v. Wade is abolished at some level through this Mississippi case, they trigger also to follow after that law and to outlaw abortion in many different aspects. So that's a really good thing that will be coming if that happens. Then I'll give you one more for today, and that is just the what's being dubbed as something like the Texas Transgender bill. And again, a lot of pushback happening in this particular bill. Governor Abbott was in the news again. I saw this meme the other day that was like, it was like, speaking of teachers, the teacher yelling at 3 students and like, why is it always you 3? And it was like Texas, Florida, California. It's always those 3. It just is. Anyway, Governor Abbott made headlines because he called on members of the public to report parents suspected of giving gender transition treatments to their children. So this one is controversial, and he has said that he has issued a directive to the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services to, quote, conduct a prompt and thorough investigation of any instances involving minors receiving elective procedure for gender transition, and that such should be classified as child abuse. He wrote that licensed professionals who work with children, like teachers, nurses, doctors, etc., who are already mandatory reporters, also report on this and make people aware if parents or children are trying to go through this gender transition chemically or physically. Abbott wants parents who are putting their child through gender transition to be subject to child abuse charges. Now, is that too extreme? We're going to have to talk about that. We're going to have to think about that. And he wrote that anyone who fails to report this, just like a mandated reporter, is subject to criminal penalties as well. So here's the questions that I started thinking of as I was processing through this, because there's a lot of talk out there. Is telling people, parents, that this is child abuse and they should be prosecuted for child abuse, is telling them that too extreme if their child is trying to elect to go through life-altering changes, and we know they're life-altering changes like hormone therapy, which means they may never develop fully the way God intended, or physical surgery, actually changing their physiology so that they will never be, again, the way they were intended to be, the way God made them. There's no other way to say that. Is that actual child abuse? That's the question. So I started coming up with some questions of my own, trying to process through this. And here's my first one. This is just trying to ramp into this. Should parents be able to raise their children? I think the answer to that is yes. Parents should be able to raise their children. I think that should be obvious. Then I asked, should parents be able to train them in the morals that the parents believe? And I think the answer to that should be yes as well. Parents are given the responsibility to train their children in the way that they believe is right. Now, we're not all going to agree what morals those are, but I believe in principle this is correct. Parents should be able to train their children in the morals that they believe to be right. Then you have to ask the question in another way. Because what we're seeing in a lot of states, especially California, but some other ones, should children be able to decide to undergo these lifelong medical and physical procedures without a parent's consent? This should be an obvious no, but in states like California, etc., this is what they're pushing for, and even have some laws on the books now that children can choose, teenagers can choose without telling their parents, without their parents' consent, to undergo these lifelong and permanent medical and physical procedures without parents' consent. That should be an obvious no. That should be an obvious, that is the state stepping in and telling the child, telling the parent that they do not have the authority to parent their children. That just seems totally wrong to me morally. Then you have to ask a more nuanced question of parents. Should parents then be able to decide to allow or encourage these lifelong medical and physical procedures that are not medically necessary? And here's where it gets opinionated, right? This is the point where everyone is arguing. Is gender transition medically necessary? The supporters would answer an ardent yes. But is this a treatment for a disease? Is this a treatment for something like cancer? No, it's obviously not. Will they literally die, as we've just heard some politicians say, if they don't get these medical or chemical or physical treatments? No, they will not surely die. I mean, they just won't. That's a lie. It's not true. They're not going to die if they don't get these treatments. In fact, the likelihood is far worse if they undergo, and again, you can just look at medical studies and statistics, the likelihood is far worse, both mentally and physically, if they undergo some of these medical and physical treatments, that they will be either mentally, emotionally impacted, or literally physically impacted. For instance, never being able to bear children in either case, or sire children. That these are serious and lifelong issues that are not life-threatening. But the powers that be are trying to say that they are life-threatening, and you have to do these procedures, even if the parents don't know or don't agree, to save the lives of these children. That's not reality. That's a bridge too far and off into the weeds of creating this own reality to support the reality that they want it to be, that this new idea of gender reality is actually real. And it's just, unfortunately, it's not real. And the whole of society, not the whole, but much of society seems to be lining up and saying, yes, we believe in this, we want to do this. And you have examples like Leah Thomas, the Penn swimmer, which we'll talk about at a later date. I'm not going to talk about that right now, but that continues to be an ongoing story that is an example of suspending reality and deciding, like, is gender real, or is it something you construct in your mind, or is it something you can just choose and change from day to day? Those are the questions that the society is asking and dealing with, and the two sides have different answers. So I'm going to go back to the foundation of the Bible. I'm going to go back to the foundation of God, knowing more than I know, because I'm just a tiny human and I don't know enough. And we used to understand that children were children as a society. For literally all of time, we used to understand that children were children, and as much as we love them, they're mush-brained tiny humans, and they need to be trained in what is right and wrong. We all used to know this. This is just something that we used to know and used to understand. But now, as a society, we're letting the children, or those that apparently hate children and want to kill them or maim them or medically change them for life, we're letting them decide their own fate writ large. And we're taking the perspective of children and then making that into law. Is this right? Again, all laws legislate morality, but should children be leading our society? If we seriously posed a question like, should children be leading our society? If we posed that at any time throughout human history, up until the last 5 seconds, everyone would laugh at you and run you out of town because it's patently ridiculous. Children should not be running the society. Even adults acting like children shouldn't be leading the society. That's a whole different matter in terms of maturity, but to literally say these children have the capacity to choose their own way and to make medical and physical and permanent decisions based on that, it's just patently ridiculous. And we, the parents, need to step up and say, no, let's not do this and ruin generations of children. And in order to do that, in some instances, we're going to have to put laws on the books and say, These things the culture is saying, these things society is saying, these things some politicians and legislators are saying and trying to do are not morally right. And we have to stand against that. And that's why it's encouraging to me that to see that some people have the bravery and the courage to stand up and make laws like this. And as followers of the way of Christ, we have to determine, do we look more like the world or do we look more like Jesus? And that's where I want to end today. And that's why I want to sum up, because I want us to come back to the Bible. And I don't want it to be my opinion. I don't want it to be the culture's opinion. I want it to be God's opinion. And that's really the baseline of this whole concept. In these laws, do these laws make us look more like the world? Do these laws make us look more like God, more like Christ? In Romans, Paul says, don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect, what is right, what is true. That's Romans 12:2. Jesus himself says, don't love the world or the things of the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father of God is not in him. For all that is in the world, the desires of the flesh, the desires of the eyes, the pride in possessions, that's in a couple different translations, but you can go read it, is not from the Father, but is from the world. And the world is passing away along with its desires, but whoever does the will of God abides forever. 1 John 2, 15, 17. Sorry, I said that was Jesus. I meant to say that was John. Sorry. Jesus is the next one. At any rate, these are important things to follow after and to understand that following after God is not looking like the world. I'm going to give you one more, and then we'll talk about the whole concept of looking like the world and looking like God. And here is really the opposite test of faith. So this is from Jesus. If you were in the world, if you were of the world would love you. The world would love you as its own. But because you are not of the world, I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. So that's the positive view, that's the negative view. So the positive view is, do you look like the world? If you look like the world, you are not of God. And Jesus says it the opposite way. Does the world love you? If the world loves you, you also are not following God. So that's the positive and negative view of these things. And we need to, and I just mean that in terms of like one side and the other side, right? We need to understand, do you look like the world? Do you act like the world? Do you follow the world? Do you do the world's practices? And if you do in all of those ways, you may need to examine if you're really following after Jesus. You may need to examine if you're really a follower of God. If you follow after God, as Jesus says, the world is also going to hate you. So if you love the world and the world loves you, there's a chance, a pretty good chance, that you're not actually following God. If you love God and you're following after God, there's also a pretty good chance that this world is not going to like you and they're going to hate you and they're going to persecute you. So where do you stand? This is the bottom line for you personally that you're going to have to figure out. Do you follow these things? And you can read through all these bills, you can read through all these articles, you can find out what you want to decide on these things. But all laws do legislate morality, and as followers of God, we need to be stewards of that morality. And we've done that for all of human history through laws and rules and electing people that have our same values. Right now, the country is being led by people who do not have biblical values. In fact, they have anti-biblical values. They want to get rid of religion, especially Judeo-Christian religion. They want to get rid of Christ. They want to get rid of God. And they're showing that. They're calling evil good, and they're calling good evil. We see that over and over again. And that's why I'm doing this. That's why I'm doing this podcast. That's why I'm trying to help you understand that it is important, if you want to follow God, to actually follow him. If you want to just go live your own life, if you want to do whatever you want to do, see where that path takes you, see where that path leads, be my guest. Just don't be surprised that when you get to the end of the road, it doesn't offer you what you think it does. There is a road, and there is a road to abundant life. There is a road to eternity in peace with God. It's a narrow road, it's a narrow way, and the world is going to be against you going that direction. I hope you choose that. God hopes you choose that too. Hope you follow after Jesus with all that you have, that God blesses you and keeps you, and as you follow, that you keep the faith. See you next time.